So on Wednesday, there was a call between President Donald Trump and Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The Turkish Foreign Ministry and the Turkish presidency issued press releases. It was just an ordinary conversation about the upcoming NATO summit. There were some other matters that they discussed, regional matters, at least that's what the press release said. No big deal. And then the next day, on Thursday, May 21st, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's judiciary made an incredible ruling, a really extraordinary move that removed the head of the opposition party and put a dumpy guy who had been voted out by the party elders instead. So it's as if the Democrats in the U.S. removed Chuck Schumer and put in John Ossoff or Chris Van Hollen or some cool Democrat. And then the courts came in and said, no, you got to go back to Chuck Schumer. I'm Borzu Deragahi. I am a foreign correspondent. I'm based in Istanbul. By the time you get this, it'll be Friday, May 22nd. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands. You can subscribe on Substack at Borzu, BORZOU.substack.com, or you can find me on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube. I bring up this matter of what happened in Turkey just to point out some of the flaws in Donald Trump's approach. His personalized style of diplomacy and international relations is really, it's not only just inefficient and potentially damaging to the U.S. reputation, as in this case, where essentially it appears that Recep Tayyip Erdogan used his phone call with the leader of the world's strongest and most important leader, to basically whitewash the removal of his main foe from the political scene and to give himself a little bit of credibility and backup. Just goes to show that Donald Trump's approach is really stupid. It's really idiotic. What normally would have happened in a U.S. administration is that there would have been some kind of consultation with the State Department. They would have said to Donald Trump, no, now is not the time to have a phone call with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, or they would have had communications at a much lower level. But by Donald Trump handing out his phone number to every world leader that he likes, essentially, and giving them permission to just ring him up whenever, he allows himself to be used. Some people say that his personalized style of global politics is kind of smart, but actually it's not at all. It's actually really stupid. And it basically lets people use Donald Trump and use the US administration. And in fact, the entire administration is filled with a bunch of corrupt people who are using Donald Trump. Donald Trump is also very corrupt, but they are basically taking advantage of him, and they're taking advantage of his stupidity, his vanity. Every single person around him has goals that are other than the well-being of the U.S. or the government or even of the Republican Party. You've got J.D. Vance, who obviously doesn't believe in anything, and he's the vice president. He basically just runs interference occasionally for Donald Trump, but he's obviously looking at 2028 and how he can take advantage and game the system to be able to become president in 2028. You've got a bunch of Israeli operatives like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who are basically using the fact that Donald Trump is president to advance a greater Israel agenda and to enrich themselves. And you've got a bunch of other clowns and losers. Marco Rubio is a good example, someone who also just wants to be president. And then you have the situation, for example, where the U.S. is threatening Cuba. More likely than not, this was something proposed by Marco Rubio. This is a cause that's near and dear to his heart. Marco Rubio is not only the Secretary of State, but he's also the National Security Advisor. He lets him gaslight President Donald Trump. More likely than not, and I'm speculating here, this whole Cuba gambit is a way of taking away attention and the big L that he's getting on Iran. And that's basically what you're seeing right now, is that a bunch of people are using Donald Trump's stupidity, his idiocy, his arrogance, to get ahead and get their own agendas done. I talked a little bit about what's happening with Donald Trump's attempts to get some kind of negotiation with Iran and how that is going right now. The latest is that Iran basically said that the supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has refused to even consider removing the enriched uranium from Iran's soil to another country. So the United States says, hey, let's move it to the United States. We want this stuff for the United States. And the Iranians were like, well, we'll consider moving it to Russia. And then the Americans were like, no, the United States. And so Mujtaba Khamenei came out and said, you know what? We're not even going to move it to Russia. Since you're being like that, since you're being maximalist, we're going to be maximalist. And if Donald Trump didn't think he was so smart when he's really dumb and really stupid, he would have consulted with the people in the State Department. They would have known that this is a pattern in Iran. When you escalate with Iran, they escalate a little bit higher. And that's been their modus operandi for years and years and years. So if you want to win a deal with Iran, the way to do that is not to push and push and push, because they'll just push back, and they'll try to push back harder if they can. And that's been how they've been operating for many, many years at this point. So anyway, I talked a little bit about this whole situation now with Donald Trump and the fact that he is just an idiot looking to look good. Basically, what I say in an interview with NewsX that I will play for you right now is that Donald Trump's main goal is to just look good, and not just to look good, but to look good on TV, because he's just an idiot. He's just a really stupid guy who doesn't really know that he's stupid. I mean, I've met people who are not very intelligent, but they know they're not that very intelligent, but they're like smart enough to know, I'm going to pick some smart people to advise me. Donald Trump is not that person. Donald Trump is an idiot who doesn't know that he's an idiot and thinks that he's brilliant. And he's surrounded by a bunch of people who keep telling him that he's brilliant in order to get ahead and get their goals accomplished. Meanwhile, they're just using him and abusing the power of the United States. Let's listen in to what I had to say.
Now joining us live to tell us more is Borzu Daragahai, Iranian-American journalist and founder of the Badlands newsletter, joining us live from Istanbul and Turkey. With regards to Pakistan's mediation, do you believe that we are now in the precipice of some sort of resolution, or do you believe that the talks will still be held up with, of course, President Trump's inconsistent patterns that we've witnessed in the past? What are your thoughts, sir?
I don't think we're on the precipice of a deal. We get these kind of optimistic notes on every early week to get the markets up, and then when the weekend comes, Trump basically says something that brings the markets down again. This has been an up and down kind of game for some time. The problem is that the positions of the two countries are so far apart. The red lines of the United States and Iran are still way far apart from each other. I suspect that, and there's some reporting to bear this out, that Donald Trump was convinced not to attack, that he was set to attack this week, but he was convinced not to attack by Gulf countries because of the impending Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, and worries that hundreds of thousands of people would be stranded in Saudi Arabia should the war take place during the upcoming Eid al-Adha holidays.
So with regards to the midterm elections, we've reported here on NewsX World that essentially there's been a poll that has essentially brought down Trump's popularity. Do you believe that this is affecting Trump and the way he's essentially viewing how he should act with regards to Iran?
I'm not sure, and it's really strange. He doesn't seem to be responding to those polls. He keeps saying he doesn't care that Americans are hurting economically, or at least it doesn't calculate into his formulations and negotiations with Iran. He's saying that the world will be so much worse off if the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, and the Iranians, he accuses them of trying to get a nuclear weapons. The Iranians deny this. His own intelligence agencies say that Iran has not yet made the decision to acquire a nuclear weapon, yet he keeps saying this. I have a feeling there's other dynamics at work. He's under pressure from his donors. He has been locked into this conflict. He's sort of seduced that it would have been an easy conflict. Now it's not an easy conflict, and Iran is not agreeing to give him a face-saving way out. He can't just leave, because that would leave the Iranians in charge of the Strait of Hormuz. It would be a clear defeat for the United States, because Iran will have expanded its powers. So he's basically in a trap. He doesn't know what to do. And if you notice, he's acting erratically. He's focusing on his ballroom in the White House. The world is at war. There's two ongoing conflicts. Americans are hurting. There's tensions with Cuba as well, as you mentioned earlier in your report. And what Donald Trump is doing is working on his ballroom. I think he's losing it.
With regards to Trump and his meeting in China with President Xi Jinping, do you believe that China has had an influence on the way Trump has now been hesitating to essentially further attacks on Iran? That China would want America to sort of step down from that stance due to the fact that China could also threaten the U.S. Is there any sort of correlation there? Do you believe that China is influencing the United States of America in this sense?
I think it should influence the United States of America. But Roshan, the guy is a game show host. He's not thinking about geopolitics. He's not thinking about a multipolar world. He's not thinking about the future of the economy. He just wants to look good on TV. I'm so sorry that it sounds so simple like that, and I really apologize for fellow analysts who try to ascribe to him a sophistication that he doesn't have. He's not playing like 5D chess, thinking about how this is going to affect the world and so on. He just wants to look good on TV. And on TV, he doesn't even care about like social media. He's living in this kind of boomer world where TV matters, and that's all his world is. And he doesn't want people to say bad things about him on TV. He doesn't want to be called a loser. So he's basically stuck in this situation. He did probably and apparently try to get China to help and intervene in this conflict when he was in China, and to help push the situation so that the Iranians would give him the face-saving out that he needs. But we saw very much so that China was intransigent. China dissed him, and immediately after he left, China invited Putin, another Iran ally and patron, to come to Beijing, and gave him a hero's welcome, as opposed to the more diffident attitude Xi Jinping showed towards Trump.
Do you believe that Putin and his visit in China will essentially stabilize matters as far as these two nations are concerned? And do you believe that that will have a spillover effect on how nations conduct trade from here on out?
I'm not sure about whether it will have an impact on trade. I think that the war in Iran is connected to the war in Eastern Europe, in that it will improve Russia's prospects. And just as Ukraine was making headway on the battlefield, Putin gets this injection of cash because of oil prices going up. So in that sense, it's kind of a disaster for Eastern Europe. And I don't think it's going to, perhaps the U.S. unsanctioning some Russian oil will help stabilize markets for a bit. But at some point, the bill is going to come due. And all those ships that are now at sea with oil on them and gas on them, they will arrive at port. And all of a sudden, there'll be no more supply coming out of the Persian Gulf. And at that point, when the bills come due, that's when the prices will really spike, and there will be a real crisis, which is coming. Hey, thanks so much for listening in. I am Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, or on Spotify, or on YouTube, or at Substack at borzu.substack.com. Thank you.